What happened that made Egypt, Jordan, and Syria declare war on Israel together in a single day? It began with a blockade. On May 22, 1967, Egyptian President Gamal Abdel Nasser closed the Straits of Tiran, a critical waterway for Israeli trade. For Israel, that wasn't just a provocation. It was an act of war. As Egyptian tanks massed in the Sinai, Syrian artillery shelled Israeli villages from the Golan Heights. Jordan signed a defense pact with Egypt, and within days, a noose had formed around the tiny Israeli state. The Arab world was ready to strike, but Israel struck first. On the morning of June 5th, Israeli jets launched a surprise assault on Egyptian airfields, wiping out nearly the entire Egyptian Air Force in under 3 hours. What followed was a war fought across 3 fronts: desert, city, and mountain. In just 6 days, Israel would seize Gaza, the Sinai Peninsula, the West Bank, and the Golan Heights. Borders would vanish, armies would fall, and the balance of power in the Middle East would shift forever. This is the story of the Six-Day War, when history was rewritten at the speed of sound.
If you value the history of wars told with care and depth, please consider subscribing or leaving a like. It helps us keep telling the stories that still shape our world today.
The gunfire didn't start in June. It started long before, with words, threats, and decades of unfinished war. Ever since Israel's founding in 1948, its Arab neighbors, Egypt, Jordan, and Syria, had refused to accept its existence. The bitter memory of their defeat in the First Arab-Israeli War still burned. Borders were uneasy, ceasefires were fragile, and beneath it all, the promise of revenge. In 1956, Israel clashed with Egypt during the Suez Crisis and came out militarily successful, but international pressure forced a withdrawal. It left Egypt emboldened, Israel surrounded. Then came 1967. In May, Egyptian President Gamal Abdel Nasser took a series of bold and dangerous steps. He expelled the United Nations peacekeeping force from the Sinai Peninsula. Then, on May 22nd, he closed the Straits of Tiran, Israel's lifeline to the Red Sea. Israel had made it clear, this would mean war. In the days that followed, Egypt mobilized over 100,000 soldiers in the Sinai. Syria joined in, shelling from the Golan Heights, and Jordan signed a mutual defense pact with Egypt. The noose was tightening. The Arab world believed it was about to end the Israeli experiment, once and for all. But Israel had no intention of waiting to be attacked.
It was just after dawn on June 5, 1967, as the Arab armies stood poised around Israel's borders, waiting for the right moment to strike. Israel moved first, quietly, precisely, and with devastating effect. In a top-secret operation known as Operation Focus, Moked, nearly the entire Israeli Air Force, some 200 aircraft, took off in waves, flying low over the Mediterranean to avoid radar detection. Their targets? Egyptian air bases. In less than 3 hours, the skies over Egypt were empty, 18 airfields bombed, over 300 Egyptian planes destroyed. Most were still on the ground when the bombs hit. It was a masterstroke of preemptive warfare. With Egypt's air force neutralized, Israel had secured the skies. And without air cover, the massive Egyptian army in the Sinai was suddenly vulnerable, blind, exposed, and alone. Back in Cairo, confusion reigned. Egypt claimed victory on state radio, but the reality was a disaster. The backbone of their defense had been shattered before the war had truly begun. Israel's airstrikes didn't stop there. That same day, Israeli planes struck airfields in Jordan, Syria, and Iraq, destroying over 400 enemy aircraft in a single day. By nightfall, the Arab coalition had lost its greatest advantage. And Israel was just getting started.
With the Egyptian Air Force in ruins, Israel seized the moment. The ground assault began almost immediately. Lightning fast,
and merciless. Israeli forces pushed deep into the Sinai Peninsula, engaging Egyptian units in fierce desert battles. Unlike their opponents, the IDF was mobile, organized, and led by commanders with experience from earlier wars. Their tanks sliced through the desert with speed and coordination. Their infantry moved quickly to secure key roads, bridges, and choke points. Egyptian troops, cut off from air support and poorly coordinated, began to fall back in chaos. Some were ordered to retreat, others never received orders at all. In the blistering heat of the Sinai, confusion turned to panic. On June 6th, the battle for Abu Agela became the turning point. There, Israeli forces broke through Egypt's strongest defensive line in the central Sinai, an achievement many had thought impossible. Using a combination of flanking attacks, night maneuvers, and sheer audacity, Israel shattered the Egyptian defense. From that point, it was a race to the Suez Canal. Over the next 48 hours, Egyptian units collapsed or surrendered. Entire divisions abandoned equipment and fled westward. By June 8th, just 3 days into the war, Israel had taken the entire Sinai Peninsula. A defeat of this scale was unthinkable. For Egypt, it wasn't just a military loss. It was a national humiliation.
While Israel was crushing Egyptian forces in the south, a second front was about to explode in the center. Despite Israeli warnings to stay out of the conflict, Jordan entered the war on the morning of June 5th. King Hussein, misled by false Egyptian reports of victory, believed the Arab coalition was winning. He ordered the Jordanian army to open fire on West Jerusalem and surrounding Israeli positions. Jordanian artillery shelled neighborhoods in Israeli-controlled West Jerusalem. Snipers fired from the old city walls. The UN headquarters was hit. Civilians took shelter as the capital came under siege. But Israel responded, swiftly and with purpose. The paratroopers brigade, led by veteran commanders, was ordered to capture East Jerusalem, including the Old City, a holy site divided since 1948. Street by street, house by house, the Israeli troops pushed forward under heavy fire. Jordanian resistance was strong, but no match for Israel's momentum. On June 7, 1967, Israeli forces reached the Lion's Gate. With a short burst of fire, they breached the walls. And then, silence. For the first time in nearly 2,000 years, Jewish soldiers stood at the Western Wall. Tears mixed with dust. Some wept openly, others simply touched the stone in disbelief. In just 3 days, Israel had taken East Jerusalem and the entire West Bank from Jordanian control. It was a military success, but it would spark decades of political, religious, and territorial conflict still raging today. We pour countless hours into making stories like this accessible to everyone. If you believe history matters, especially now, please help us continue. Like, share, or consider subscribing. It truly makes a difference. While Egypt and Jordan were reeling, the northern front remained dangerously active. Syria, perched on the high ridges of the Golan Heights, had been shelling Israeli villages for years, raining mortars down on civilians from their elevated positions. For days, the Israeli government hesitated. The Golan was a natural fortress, rugged, steep, and heavily fortified. Attacking it would mean high casualties, but leaving it untouched meant living under constant threat. On June 9th, with the southern and central fronts secured, Israel made the call: take the Golan. What followed was one of the most grueling battles of the war. Israeli forces climbed steep hills under relentless Syrian fire. Mines littered the roads. Bunkers were dug deep into the rock. Syria's defenses were brutal and built to hold. But Israeli tanks and infantry pushed forward. They flanked where they could, blasted through where they had to. Despite heavy losses, they broke through the first and second lines of Syrian defenses. On June 10th, the final day of the war, Israeli forces captured the key city of Quneitra. The Golan Heights, once a launching pad for Syrian attacks, were now in Israeli hands. It wasn't just a battlefield victory. It was a strategic transformation, eliminating the constant threat to northern Israel. But the cost was high, and for Syria, the loss would burn for generations. It tripled its territory, capturing the Sinai Peninsula, Gaza Strip, West Bank, East Jerusalem, and the Golan Heights. The Arab coalition was left in shock. Their air forces crippled, their armies defeated, and their capitals, Cairo, Amman, and Damascus, facing public outrage and political humiliation. On June 11th, under pressure from the United Nations and global powers, a ceasefire was agreed upon. But victory came at a cost. Somewhere 20,000 Arab soldiers were dead. Nearly 1,000 Israelis had lost their lives. Thousands more were wounded on both sides. In Israel, the mood was both euphoric and solemn. A nation that had feared annihilation now stood taller than ever before, but its challenges were far from over. With victory came occupation and new political dilemmas. What would Israel do with the millions of Palestinians now living under its control? What about the sacred city of Jerusalem, now united under one flag, but sacred to three religions? The war was over, but the consequences were just beginning.
The world watched in stunned silence as news of Israel's lightning-fast victory spread. In Western capitals like Washington and London, the war was seen as a military triumph, proof of Israeli resilience and strategy. But in much of the Arab world, the defeat sparked outrage, mourning, and calls for revenge. The United Nations moved quickly, passing Resolution 242, which called for Israel to withdraw from territories it had occupied in return for peace with its neighbors. But the wording was vague. Territories versus the territories. And that ambiguity would haunt negotiations for decades. Meanwhile, at the Khartoum Conference in August 1967, Arab leaders responded with what became known as the three no's. No peace, no recognition, and no negotiations with Israel. In the Soviet bloc, tensions rose sharply. The USSR, furious over Israel's dominance and its Western allies' support, severed diplomatic ties with Israel and doubled down on arming Arab regimes. The Cold War had just gained a new front, the Middle East. At the same time, Israel's image shifted globally. Once seen as the underdog, it now held immense power and occupied territories filled with Palestinians. To many, it was a heroic defense. To others, the beginning of a new crisis. The diplomatic storm had only just begun. The Six-Day War may have ended in June 1967, but its shadow looms over every conflict in the Middle East today. The territories captured during the war, Gaza, the West Bank, East Jerusalem, and the Golan Heights, remain at the heart of the region's deepest divisions. They became flashpoints not just for politics, but for identity, faith, and survival. The Israeli-Palestinian conflict, which dominates headlines to this day, is rooted in what happened during those 6 days. The rise of the PLO, the demand for Palestinian statehood, the cycles of intifadas, the barriers, the rocket fire, and the airstrikes, it all traces back to 1967. In Gaza, controlled now by Hamas, the scars of occupation, war, and blockade have shaped a generation born long after the tanks rolled through. In the West Bank, Israeli settlements, built on land captured in the war, remain one of the thorniest issues in any peace negotiation. And in Jerusalem, a city sacred to 3 major religions, tension still simmers over who controls what and why. Even beyond the borders, the Six-Day War redefined how regional powers interact. Iran, Saudi Arabia, Egypt, Jordan, Syria, Lebanon, all have shifted their alliances, policies, and military strategies based on what happened in 1967. The peace deals, the proxy wars, the uprisings, the collapses, they echo with the unresolved questions of that short but explosive conflict. Because the truth is, the war that lasted just 6 days never really ended.